Unlock the power of AI in marketing with our new series, AI Agent. Dive into the world of SaaS tools, discover how marketing pros deploy bots, and explore the best use cases for AI in your marketing strategy. Only on Marketing in the Age of AI podcast with Emanuel Rose.
Welcome to this episode of Marketing in the Age of AI. And this is the AI bot special series. And today we have a great guest who's going to help me understand the distinctions between all the different types of AI bots and AI agents and AI staff and agentic AI. And at least as much as I can understand. So today we have Michael Cunningham, who's a machine learning engineer, and he specializes in building AI systems that tackle real-world challenges. And he is the founder and writer of a free bi-weekly newsletter called Building AI Agents. And it's a newsletter on the developments in AI agentic systems. Michael, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me today.
Emanuel, thank you. Great to be here.
Well, it's so nice to have a conversation about this, because there's a lot of things in marketing that just get thrown around, and sometimes there's people who care for the distinctions about these things, and sometimes there's people who are just using the distinctions and are not using the distinctions and making it sound better than it is. So I'm really happy to have you help me understand where we're at kind of in the agent world in current reality, and where you're seeing from your work where we're headed in the short term and maybe even some long-term prognostication. So
sure, yeah, happy to add some clarity.
So that's cool. So how long have you been working in the machine learning space?
So I've actually been a machine learning engineer full-time for the past year and a half. So I was actually, I came to the space by kind of a crazy route. So I was originally a biologist doing essentially benchtop research for Big Pharma. And around the summer of 2021, I started reading about the developments with large language models. This was, fully year and a half before ChatGPT. And so this was very much under the surface at the time, right? People weren't really talking about it. And this small corner of the internet where you see, these kind of tech nerds discussing this stuff, I got really sucked into that and just realized, oh my God, like this is going to change the world. And nobody's talking about it yet. And so spent the next year and a half just hardcore reskilling into AI. I had some programming background before that. And so eventually I actually became a machine learning engineer, and now, work at the same company that I'd been at before, but doing ML engineering instead of biology. And I've been there for the past year and a half.
That's awesome. Well, that's cool that you had that little creative spark and you saw that opportunity and you educated yourself and you got into it. So congratulations on that. That's pretty.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to just ask some really dumb, basic questions so that I am up to speed on how kind of the sequencing, and you can let me know how on track or how I need to reframe my thinking. So number one is a chat bot, right? That is like a very defined piece of software that reads a very defined set of documents or say data warehouses. So am I on track with that one?
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly accurate.
Okay. So then we're getting into this idea of where we have either AI bots or AI agents, where it's not only calling on this specific website, but it's also calling potentially on an LLM, right? Is that the next kind of layer there?
Yeah, roughly. So I'd say with an agent, the real difference there between that and a chatbot is that you're actually using the LLM not just to communicate with the human user, but actually for its sort of innate intelligence. So the best description that I've ever heard of what an agent is, and this is like we're getting into basically like the oldest question or the most hotly debated question in the agent field, right? Like this is the, like, what is the sound of one hand clapping of AI agents? Like, what actually is an AI agent? And everyone has their own view on it. But my favorite one was, or my favorite description is by the CEO of LangChain. So LangChain, big agent framework company. And so their CEO is a guy named Harrison Chase. He had a really good definition where he said that an agent is the use of an LLM to determine the control flow of an application, right? So essentially, instead of a human determining what a program does, right, step by step, you're actually using that innate embodied intelligence in the LLM to control that application and dictate what it does.
Okay. So in marketing terms, it would be if maybe if your chatbot is connected to LLM also and is able to say, well, we don't have access to that information from the website, but here are some other options for you out in the marketplace. I mean, does that match a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say, a good example might be, let's say you have a marketing chatbot, right? If there is no sort of LLM intelligence on the back end of the chatbot, right? It's powered by an LLM and you're speaking back and forth with the LLM, right? That's a traditional chatbot, but it's not, it's like you said, it's not doing anything on the back end. It's not calling any data, and it's not really thinking for itself in the sense that, a lot of the reasoning that these models can do, most of those reason, we call reasoning tokens, right? Where it's generating this output, and then that is it sort of its thinking. A lot of that for an agent is never actually intended to be seen by humans, right? So a chatbot, everything that comes out of that LLM is being seen directly by the user, right? Yeah. Whereas with an agent, that's all happening on the back end, and then what you're seeing is just sort of the result of that agent's internal deliberation, right? So again, kind of getting back to the marketing chatbot, let's say you're speaking with this chatbot, but if it's an agent on the back end, it's saying, okay, the user wants, let's say, this specific data about how well one of our campaigns did, right? Well, how do I get that data? So I need to, go to the API of this website that, that we're running our ads on, get the ad performance, right? Maybe do some data transformations on it to clean it up, for the user, and then present it back to the user. And that's all happening on the back end, right? The agent is doing this without any human input other than the initial request.
Yeah, I guess the human input will have been in the development of that particular agent, right? In terms of how it logifies or thinks about things.
Yeah, well, that's the ideal, right? Is that the human builds the agent, and then once it's in place, that that reasoning is being done on the back end, and you don't have to have necessarily input into it, or maybe you do have input into it, but it's not the same level as you having to control every single step, right? So it's a major labor saver.
Yeah, understood. And so maybe you've got kind of a chatbot, you've got an AI agent chatbot, and then you have this idea of agentic bot, right? Which is the next level that we're moving into. And we described the difference between agentic and AI agent.
Yeah. So I mean, again, I think this is one of these things where like everyone has their own view on what all these words mean. And I think, for the way most people talk about it, and the way most I generally see it is that sort of agentic is like the character of being an agent, right? So if it's capable of doing these actions on its own, or sort of thinking on its own without just interacting with the human alone, right? Then that's agentic, and that's what makes it an agent. Again, this is not in the Oxford English Dictionary yet, right? Right. So
we're still making it up, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone's entitled to their own definition, for sure.
Yeah. But we're in a situation now where, for instance, if I wanted to buy a new fly rod, I could theoretically tell an agent that I wanted to go fishing for trout in the Western United States, and I wanted it to be a 5-weight rod that's 9 feet, and I don't want to spend more than $500. Mm-hmm. And with that amount of criteria, that agent would be able to go out and find a number of options for me, and then ask if I'm ready to purchase and where I wanted to send it.
That's the ideal, yeah. And there are a lot of companies that are actually working on these sort of agent-powered marketplaces, right? So where what you do is, exactly, you give that kind of a request, and then it has access to, all of the data of that marketplace, right? So, think of like something like Amazon, all of the parameters of every one of those products, right? The cost, I wish I was more of a fishing expert so I could throw out, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, the
Right.
length of the pole, that kind of
Right.
thing, right?
Yep.
Like that's all stored in a database. And so it can actually go in there and say, okay, match all those criteria, and even, embody a little bit of, you might say, more like subjective human intelligence, right? So like, let's say you say like, I want something in, a darker color, right? Darker color pole, something like that, right?
Yeah.
It might be able to say, okay, well, these are considered darker colors, these aren't, right? Which isn't necessarily like a direct programmatic thing. It's actually like the LLM doing a little bit of, again, you might say subjective thinking.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I'm curious. Do you have any thoughts or feelings about how I might be able to get kind of ahead of this in terms of, like, if I were to want to build my own personal AI agent, and what kind of custom GPT and content I would put in a custom GPT for, like, an administrative assistant for all things in my life?
Yeah, for sure. The OpenAI's, like, GPTs, that allows you to kind of do simple workflows like these. Now, if you really want to get into what I would, consider like the more serious agent stuff, right? There are a lot of great frameworks out there that are, intended to allow people to do that without actually having like a lot of software engineering knowledge, right? So,
Good. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Because the first wave, we're all in Python, right? The programming language that I primarily use, and even I would look at some of the back end code on these things and be like, oh my god, like I don't know, I don't know how to do this, right?
Right.
But there are all these great frameworks that are coming out now that, they're called low code or no code, where, right as the name suggests, right, you don't need to do any coding yourself. You can just, I think that my favorite interface that I see with these is kind of drag and drop blocks, right?
Yep.
So
Sure.
you're essentially building these flows by taking like blocks of, that represent like an LLM call, right? Or a database or something like that, and just physically like snapping them together on the screen. So some good examples of those would be, there's one called Flowwise, Zapier,
Yep.
N8N is a good one.
Yep.
And so, I mean, there are more of these than anyone could possibly name. It seems like a new one comes out every few minutes.
And for people who are not, even where no code or low code can get confusing, because it's kind of intense in terms of like the number of options of things that you can use.
Mm-hmm.
I recommend that people get out, sticky notes on the wall in terms of a sequence of things, or a PowerPoint doc, and just to start mapping out kind of their internal process, and then having then going to those no code solutions and start mapping based on that original document. Do you have any other shortcuts like that?
No, honestly, I would say that is a great place to start. I mean, it's, it seems intimidating at first, right? You're thinking about like AI agents and software and programming and LLMs and all this stuff. But, that's the beauty of these no code frameworks. They make it very easy to do, things like that. And, anyone can you can verbalize what you want out of an agent, right? Like, okay, here I want, I'm building a marketing agent, right? I want to be able to ask it how well one of our campaigns did.
Right.
And I need to be able to connect it to that data. And if, and perform this change, this change to the data, and then spit it back to me, right? And that's something you can easily put together with, some sticky notes on the wall. And then, it's right there. And you just turned it into an actual flow with one of these frameworks.
Yeah, I guess probably what somebody needs to invent is, or create a kind of a middleware where I can just talk to it like an intern, puts it into the LLM, then the LLM spits out the sequence in N8 or something.
We'll see. Yeah, there's actually a lot of groups that are working on this, right? So this is the idea of like agents that build agents, which
Right.
of course is like the natural progression of this, right? It's like, okay, we're using AI agents for everything now. Well, what else can we do with AI agents? We can build AI agents. And so, unfortunately, I haven't yet seen anyone put out a version of this that's accessible to the general public in an easy way, right? I mean, there have been some scientific papers on it where they've been able to build some pretty useful agentic workflows by with an agent, but a lot of that is still in the kind of the development stage. I can't think of off the top of my head any one who's really gotten this to the point where it's easy for the public to do. But whoever does it is going to be a billionaire. So I'm giving that one away for free.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the interesting thing about this time, right? Is that it's so dynamic, and the machines are learning, and we're learning, and it's changing at a pace that nobody's ever seen before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is the rate of progress really is insane, and I truly do like wake up every single morning wondering what the next crazy thing is going to be, and I start catching myself saying things like, yeah, that was back in the day, 6 months ago, they couldn't, models couldn't do this, right?
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. That's how dynamic it is. And it will be interesting to see what happens in 3 months, much less 6 months, right? It's completely different.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And this really is being driven by how many providers there are in the space and in the competition, right? And even that's increasing every day. It used to be that kind of the big two were OpenAI and Anthropic, and they were really, competing to put out the best models. And then you had Meta jumped in, you've got, Google jumped in now, just last night, Elon Musk's, XAI put out their new Grok model. Yeah. And so, the more providers you have in the space, the faster it goes. And it seems like this kind of, self-fulfilling or self-reinforcing loop.
Yeah, it's true. And then what is it that you're using on a daily basis? Which are the LLMs to do your work?
So I still primarily use OpenAI, and I say still because I think that people have started to move a little bit more towards Claude. Any of these I think are generally pretty good offerings. Out of kind of those, you might call them the big four, right? So like Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, and Meta. You can't really go wrong with any of them. They're all somewhat similar, right? I mainly use OpenAI because a lot of my existing workflows are built with OpenAI. But the great thing is, again, because they're converging on kind of a common interface, you can swap these out without too much difficulty.
Yeah. And in some respects, they're also learning from each other, right? So that kind of pushes it even faster.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it used to be very much the Wild West where, each of these companies had kind of their own, their own style, their own way of going about it. And I would say that they are starting to converge more towards, this common set of things that work, right? So all of these LLMs now work fairly similarly on the back end. They might have some slight differences in the architecture and slight differences in how they're trained, but I wouldn't say that there's quite the same level of just, total diversity that you had like 2 years ago or a year ago.
I got you. Well, good. So for those of us who are just learning how to deploy these things, besides using a no-code or low-code solution, what are 2 or 3 of the steps that you recommend to be able to get our feet wet and just to start testing how this can change our business?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say, a big one would just be reading, reading to stay up to date on where the space is going. And this is where I have to shamelessly plug my own newsletter.
Please do. Tell us.
Out there, like building AI agents, right? And we target an audience that I would say is fairly broad. So we're going all the way from software engineers like me, where we're directly using some of these more intense high code frameworks, all the way up to just business people who have no coding background whatsoever. Maybe they've never even used one of these low code frameworks, right?
Right.
But they just want to know where the field is going, what the hottest trends are, and kind of, as you mentioned, like get their feet wet, start to learn how this can kind of impact their business. I would say, and this is my second very self-serving answer, is on the other side is I do think that having some level of being conversant in Python, which is the language that a lot of this stuff is being done in, is useful. I wouldn't say that that's going to be essential for the vast majority of people, but I have started to recommend it to some people who maybe they have some coding background, like Excel scripting, that kind of thing. It isn't that much of a leap to start to go to, okay, I can write a couple of simple Python loops and then connect an agent to my data. And then I can start to do things that maybe the low code frameworks don't make as easy.
Yeah, I got you. Well, I do like that about having somebody on your team or finding a consultant that can help you think about these things, because it is a different style, and I've made a commitment to not think like a programmer because I'm a creative, right? And I have to be out in the ether more than trying to think about these super sequential things. But I like to have people who can help me take big concepts and make them clear steps, and then figure out how to get the software to do those steps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, in the future, every business is going to need to have people who are conversant in AI agents. And I think, again, like the beauty of these low code frameworks is that person might not even necessarily need to be a software engineer, right? I mean, every big company is going to have software engineers who can actually do this stuff on the, on at the very low level, right? But even I would say, if you are like a small business, even like a local restaurant or something like that, these automations are going to be useful, and I think people are going to be find ways to slot them in. And again, that's kind of these low code frameworks allow even people who don't have a background in programming, where all you need is something that, like, let's say finds out what the most popular dishes for your restaurant for the week were, and then like suggests oh, maybe we should eliminate this one because it's not being used, or like these two dishes are similar, maybe combine them. Like that's the kind of thing that again, even just a very small business can use, and it would add a lot of value.
And it wouldn't take a lot of data. It'd take a weekly report that you could upload and then have that script run to pull that information out for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even small amounts of data, you can pull out some pretty cool insights with this kind of thing.
Yeah, well, that's cool. So tell us again how we get in touch with you if you want to have a conversation about this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, Michael Cunningham. I also, obviously building AI agents, subscribe. And I'm on X at Michael Cunningham 1440, I think.
All right.
I don't use my X handle much, so don't worry too much about that one. But definitely, building AI agents would be the number one. All
right. Well, I do love the newsletter, and that's how you and I got connected. And I appreciate that you're doing that work, and I'm excited to see it every 2 weeks. I wish it was more frequent. So
maybe I'll get an AI agent to do it.
There we go. I love it, Michael. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate your insight, and I'm going to reach out to you again in 3 or 4 months and see if I can get you back on the show. We can see what's changed.
Sounds great. Love to come back. Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael. Well, there you have it. We're still in the middle of figuring out what all these words mean and how to use it. And so it's important to do some reading, subscribe to the newsletters, and pay attention to what's going on. Building AI agents.ai, great resource. And identify some challenges in your business that you need help with, and then use some of these no-code solutions to develop some workflows. And all you have to do is go into Perplexity or Grok and type in no code AI agent solutions, and you'll get a host of things to try. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks for listening to Marketing in the Age of AI. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. Your copy of Authentic Marketing in the Age of AI is available at Amazon.com or EmanuelRose.com. You can also connect with Emanuel on LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.